Hi, everyone. This is a demo for exercise 2. I'm going to show you how to set it up and how to do a bit of the drawing. So painting. So this exercise is to prepare you again for doing project 1, working in layers in Illustrator and setting up background, middle ground, foreground, inside out, working bottom to top. So exercise 2, I'm going to be reading from the exercise sheet, and you can find the exercise sheet in the files area of Canvas, of my Canvas, for DMA 012. Or I think I put this sheet also into your module 2. So exercise 2, drawing and painting a plant in a pot in Adobe Illustrator, geometric and organic shapes, creating a new color palette through sampling of local color using layers. Okay, so I'm gonna bring up an Illustrator document. I'm holding the project sheet in my hand as I do this, so I don't need to read it from the screen anymore, but you could print one out or watch on the screen or bring it up on the screen as I do this. So, great. Okay, so I'm going to the bottom of my screen, clicking on the AI icon, and I'm going to make a new document. So create new, and I'm going to choose letter size and portrait orientation, change it to portrait orientation. I like to work in inches, so I'm going to change my measurements to inches. One artboard. Raster effects, again, for the sake of this class, it could be medium because we're not going to be printing the photo. We just need the photo there for reference. And if you want, you can go down to more settings. Oh, CMYK color. So no, we don't need to go to more settings, just say create. So there it is. You're going to need to have these palettes, color, swatches, stroke, layers, and brushes. And in this case, we also need to bring the gradient palette. So if you don't have it in your palette dock, bring it up under window. Let me turn off my phone. Bring it up under window. So I'm going to squinch up my layers palette because you don't need that much of it. I'm trying to make everything small because I'm working on a laptop. And then I'm going to click on the gradient and click on the word gradient, the palette, and bring it back, bring it out. And then on the double arrow, push the other palettes back into the palette dock. So now I have a floating gradient palette, and you really want that available but not taking up so much space on your screen. So push it in with brush, layers, brushes, gradient. Great. Okay, so you're going to place the photo that you need onto the bottom layer. So go to your layers palette, make sure you're layer 1, you're on your layer 1, that's all that we have right now. And yeah, and then say file place. I'm going to my desktop because I know that's where I just put this file. And it was in exercise 2, the file. So it's a JPEG, and actually yours says image for exercise 2. Your selection tool or cursor, whatever you want to call it, comes in loaded, and you can pull it or you can double click, as I've taught you before. Now this came in much larger than you need. So you can either hold shift and just pull at the corners to resize it, or you can even go into object, transform, scale, and say 50%, and see if that gets you faster where you want to be with this image. Then you have to find it again. There it is down here. So I'm pushing it up. It's still too big, so I'm bringing it up. But this time I can just hold shift and pull at the corner. Holding shift constrains the image. I might have to do it several times because it just really came in way too big. And now it's too small. So maybe I'll resize this image for you if I have time so that it won't be so big. And I'm pretty much pulling it to fit the dimensions of the artboard. Now I've showed you, hold shift the whole time to constrain the proportions. And I've shown you what you can do if the artboard is a bit too big. You can close down the artboard to fit the image. So I went to the artboard tool. If you hover above it, it says artboard tool. And I just simply closed after I've resized the image and kept the proportions constrained. So here's my image. I'm showing you before that you can dim this image if it's on the bottom layer, and I'm going to be showing you that in a minute, but I want to make a copy of this first so I can sample color from it. So hold Option Alt on the PC and pull a copy to the left, the way we did in the first exercise, and now you have a copy that you can sample from. Notice that in the Layers palette, a little box appears. So you can push that to the second layer. We don't have a second layer yet. So click away, make a second layer. In fact, I think I asked you to make 3 more layers. And I think actually you need 4 because one of them is going to have this on it. So push that up. And then you'll call the bottom layer background, the layer 3 background. Layer 4 middle ground. And the way I'm renaming these layers is just by clicking on the word layer, the name, layer 4, and I can say middle ground. And layer 5, foreground. Okay, so as when we did exercise 1, many of you will like it better if your bottom layer that you're drawing on top of is dimmed. So you can click on the layer itself, move away from the word, click on the layer itself, and dim the image. I'm dimming it to 50%. There it is. And that's so that you can draw on top of it, the shapes on top. All right. So I'm going to show you how to draw a background color and put a gradient into it. So I'm going to make sure that the 2 bottom layers are locked. You still can sample from a layer that's locked or from an image that's locked. And I'm working on the background. I'm going to put a color into this background shape. So I'm going to consider the background to be these 2 shapes, the wood of the table and the wall color. So I'm going to draw shapes, 2 shapes, with my pen tool. The pen tool is to be found at the top of your palette, and I'm simply going to make shapes that I can then fill on the background layer. So click, click, click right across, and I don't mind that it's actually that it's going right through the plant because this is going to be behind the plant. So now I'm going to sample this color, and it's up to you how you make it. I'm going to sample. I'm going to go to my eyedropper tool, and I'm going to sample some of this color, and notice that it made it that color. Now, if you like it like that, you can leave it like that, or you can put more of a gradient into it. With the color of the table, maybe I'll put a gradient starting with this color and moving across. So I'm going to click away. And if you think you may have problems with this shape interfering with the bottom shape, you can lock it. So you can go to temporarily, you can say object lock, and that locks that shape in place. And on the same layer, because this is the background layer, I'm going to put the color, the table. I'm going to draw the table. So I'm going to do that also because these are geometric shapes. I'm going to do that also with the pen tool. So the pen tool, just click, 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 click. Now it started to interfere with the other shapes. So I'm going to go backwards, Command Z. That shape should not have interfered because it was meant to be locked. So I'm on the right layer. I'm going to go back, click away, and go back to the shape that I made originally, which is that shape. Actually, I don't even want it to have a stroke anymore. And it should have become, oh, I didn't go, it's locked. You have to move over, selection. Okay. So then now it won't, you have to go cascade over, lock selection. You can't just let go on the word lock, you have to move over to selection. So now you can draw the new shape, click, 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 click. Notice it's filling, but with the same color. Now go back to the point of origin and that closes the shape. So now I have this shape of the table active, and you can sample a color, which is the brown, but now we want there to be a gradient in this. So first, let me show you that if a little bit of the, if it's not exactly what you want, and I'm actually taking off the stroke now, I'm going to say no stroke, if you notice in my tools, and I'm going to let it have a fill. But if it's a little off, you can go to the white selection tool, go to the point you want to pull or adjust, and pull it a tiny bit so that it is where you want it. So the white selection tool, you can adjust shapes by going to the point you want to pull at and just doing that, pulling at the shape with the white, pulling at the point with the white selection tool. The white selection tool enables you to modify points. The black one does not. Okay, so this isn't exactly what I want. Notice that the right side of the table is a little darker. In fact, it has some shadows on it than the left side. So you're going to be using the gradient palette now. Go to gradient, and I'm going to create a new gradient. So the way you create a gradient is simply by dragging, so you can drag swatches underneath the parts of the gradient, or you can click and make the colors where you want by clicking underneath. In this case, I'll show you how to make a new gradient. I'm clicking underneath the gradient bar, and then I'm going to create some colors in my swatches palette. So I showed you how to sample for swatches already. This is one of the new swatches I'm going to create. So I'm going to say, go up to my swatches palette, pull it over, and say new swatch, and say okay, and it zaps it into your swatches for this exercise. And then go back to your photo and click. And this is my darker brown, and I'm going to say new swatch. So you can also go to the bottom of the swatches palette where there's a plus and say new swatch. Okay, so now you have two swatches, and you can pull those to where you want them on the gradient. So I'm going to pull the dark one under the very end of the swatches bar. I'm creating a new gradient, and pull the other one to this end of the swatches bar. You can also pull a gradient of swatches, by the way, underneath, in between the two endpoints. So you create a gradient that has more colors. Now you need to actually save this gradient as well. You can click on the shape, but the shape is immediately, once you click on the shape, it's going to give you that fill color again. So you need to save this swatch as a gradient. It's a gradient. It's going to come up as a gradient swatch. So watch. If I go to the bottom of the swatches palette and say plus now, it's going to say new gradient swatch. Say OK, and that's going to put it right there. When you hover, you can even name it if you want. Where it said new gradient swatch, you can name it. But I'm just going to, now I'm going to click on this shape that I made, and then I'm going to click on the new gradient. It actually knew how to put it because this is a horizontal gradient. But if you don't like the way the gradient sits inside that shape, you can go over to a gradient, to your tools, and you can go to the gradient tool, and it will let you pull this tool in the direction that you want the gradient. So left to right in this case, and I get the way I want it to lie. Now, actually, I want the lightest part to be right here and the darkest part to be here, so I'm going to even change it again. There. So that's going to be the way my gradient sits inside this shape. Okay, so I go back to my layers palette now, and I will start to work on one more layer for you. So I would say that the middle ground is the pot itself, because the plant overlaps the pot. So the plant will be my foreground because it's the thing that sits in front of everything else. And the pot will be my middle ground. So I'm going to lock my background layer, and I can turn it off, and I'm going to draw the pot now by itself, singly. So because I know that then when I turn it on, it'll sit in front of the in front of the background, because everything that's the layers on top overlap the layers on the bottom. So go to your, I think I have to decide what tool I'm going to use to draw this pot. And things that are geometric, mathematically derived shapes are best with the pen tool. So, or the shape tools. If you can think of ways to make it with the shapes, these are the shapes, you could do it with that. For instance, the dirt in the pot, I might make with a textured shape so I might make the dirt inside the pot with the ellipse tool. And I might pull an ellipse right here and see if I can make it about the right shape. I can modify that in a few minutes and push it up inside. And you can push at the edges of it to make it smaller. In this case, I want to make it a little bit smaller this way. Maybe a little smaller that way, until it sits just where I want it. I can use the arrow keys to adjust its location. Okay, so I can lock that shape if I'm worried about it interfering with the pot as I draw. You can always unlock it, so lock selection. And now I can draw the pot itself. So I'm going to go to the pen tool and start drawing. Just again, click. Now you have a curve that you have to pull. So I left off at this point. I'm going to go over here and pull a curve. And you can adjust the curve with these handles. Now it's putting a color in that I don't want it to put in. I'm going to click white just so that I can see it better. Here I want it to be straight. So I'm changing the direction of the curve. So click on the point you left off at, straight up. And here I'm going to go over to the point I'm going to end at and pull another curve down to be the rim. Now again, if you have a point, if you don't like, if the shape isn't quite what you want, you can go to the white selection tool and pull at an endpoint. For instance, this one I can push up. So I can adjust with the white selection tool. Again, if you think that's going to interfere with something that you're doing later, you can lock it. But first, I want to put some color into it. So again, I need to make the colors the way I want. So I'm sampling. I'm seeing that maybe it goes from light to dark, or dark in the middle and light again. So I'm going to make a gradient that fits that. So I'm going to the gradient bar, and I'm going to sample some colors and create some colors. So go to the eyedropper tool. The shortcut for that is I think. And you sample on the left-hand side of this, there's a reflection there. And you can either just pull down and put it right there so you're okay. And then I'm going to sample the color right here. Notice well, that's the problem. It's going to change every time, but I'm making a new gradient, so you're not going to be able to preview it on here until you've made the whole gradient. And then I'm going to sample from this side and pull. So I've created my gradient. Now I do have to save the gradient. So say new swatch, or the plus sign, new gradient swatch. There it is. And now this is not quite what I wanted that. I wanted that color to be this. So I'm gonna have to work with this a bit. This gradient. You can, by the way, when you make a gradient, you can pull a stop off and get rid of it completely. So there's some stops in here that I don't want, some brown stops that I don't want at all. So work with it a bit. See, there's a brown, there it is. You have to pull that off so you don't get that there. Okay, so that looks somewhat similar to what's here. You might have to work with that a little bit more. All right, so now I'm going to lock the shape once I have the color in it. I also am going to save this gradient and get rid of that one. So this is the one that I want. You can delete this swatch later. And I'm going to lock this shape now. And then draw the bottom part of the pot. And then I'll show you how the background shape sits on top of the, how the middle ground shape sits on top of the background shape, sorry. So go to the pen tool. And I'm drawing the bottom of the pot. Again, I should check that I'm on the right layer, and yeah, on the middle ground layer. If it helps you, you can also curve. I'm pulling a curve, and whoops, notice that I didn't click back on the point that I left off at, so it just kept making the same curve. I need to click on the point I left off at to let it know that I want to change the direction, that I want this to be a straight line now, and then I'm going to pull another curve. And then I'm going to sample, again, a gradient, make a gradient that fits this. So go to your eyedropper tool, and I'm going to go to the gradient. I'm creating a gradient, and this time I'll sample here, and I want to sample pure color, or if you like this gradient, you can put the same gradient in that you used before, but I'm going to show you that it's actually a little different. It's darker. So sample the color and pull that color from the swatches palette to the bottom of your gradient. Then sample from your photo, pull the color to the middle of your gradient, and sample, pull the color to the right-hand side of your gradient so that you have the gradient there. And you can then save that gradient. So it's the last one you made, and you can fill this shape that you just made with that gradient, which is a little different than the top one. And now if you don't like, some of the handles, again, help you change the shape a tiny bit. Whoops, that's way too much. There. So you have your pot. Anything that you want to change, shapes that you want to take a stroke off of. For instance, if you like the line on the top of the pot, you can leave it. That shape is locked right now. So in order to unlock things so that you can change them on that layer, you have to go to unlock all on that layer and pull, and you can start changing things a tiny bit to make it, to modify it to where you would like it. Okay, so I've got this pot now drawn, and I can turn off my, in my layers palette, I can turn off the photo actually, and you can see the pot. Now you have to decide how you need to modify things to make them work a little bit better. The ellipse needs to be a little bit bigger, for instance. And if you don't like the stroke, and I think it's, I mean, some of you might like it, some of you not. I don't think it's very realistic to have stroke. Line is kind of a figment of our imaginations. Rendering is really created by using values, shades and tints and shades. So I'm going to take the stroke off. So all you have to do is select those shapes, go to the stroke and say no stroke. Okay, so, and I like that better. You can also make sure that this does not have a stroke. Good. So now you've got the background layer where the pot is, middle ground where the pot is, and you've got the background layer turned off. If you turn the background on, you'll have the background behind the pot. And now you're going to draw the plant. So you want to lock the middle ground at this point. And you're going to draw the plant on top of the of everything else. So you can just start drawing, and you'll see that it comes in on top. So the plant's going to be the roots and the whole thing, the whole plant. I will show you an example that a student did now, so that you don't have to watch me tediously or meticulously, let's say, draw the plant. But I will show you an example that a student did. So let me diminish this and go into this example. Okay, so she left the line on. I'm going to say Command 0, which fits it in the window. And we're going to look at her layers. So I'm going to turn off all the layers. Here's her bottom layer, which is just as she followed me in class. Here's the plant dimmed, and here's the one she was sampling from. Here's how she did her background. Here's how she did her middle ground, which is the pot. And here's how she did the foreground, which is her plant. Now she could have chosen all of the shapes on a layer by turning everything else off. And you can say Command A, select all. She has it locked, so I turn off the layer. She could say Command A, that selects everything. And you could turn off the stroke, but it's saying it won't show you that there's some stroke because some of it has stroke and some of it doesn't, and it's grouped. So you have to, she would have had to ungroup it and choose the things that she wants to take the stroke off of. So I think it's grouped, which is why it's, though you'd have to choose like this leaf. Notice that if I just choose that leaf, it shows me that there's a black stroke, and actually she put gradients into the shapes, which is very beautiful. So the leaves should all have their own gradient or their own color. In the case of the dark ones, it almost seems that we can't see a gradient. We just see, for instance, this shape right here, dark color. But you can take the stroke off. For instance, if you didn't want it on this leaf, you could just say no stroke, and then that shape would not have a stroke. But she left it on, which is fine. It's up to you. So I'm going to close this. She probably did some of this with the pen tool and some of it with the pencil tool. Remember, the pencil tool is under the shaper tool, just so strange because we don't use the shaper tool for much. But here is the shaper tool, and if you click on it, the pencil tool is right underneath. So if I turn on her layers again, we'll build it. I'll show you. She had that. There's the background. There's the middle ground. And I had left the foreground on. So this is your exercise 2. She did not put texture inside. And I think this color is a little light, actually. But if you wanted, you could draw with the pencil some shapes in here, or you could just create, find a swatch that had a slight texture. But I don't mind if you just simply put a dark color inside the pot to represent the earth. Okay, thank you.